a little message. If it annoys you, you can hit the dismiss and it will go away. And we'll walk through that. So welcome to our confidence builder. Tonight we're going to service delivery plan and walking people through it. So we're excited that you're joining us. If you missed last night's presentation, we've posted it in Schedule, and you can click on the class and you'll see a stream where you'll be able to watch it right there. And if you have any questions, we'll be on after the call to help with finding that and going from there. So welcome to tonight's confidence builder on the service delivery plan.
Excellent. Dave, you want to lead us out? David?
Actually, Carl, if we could go to Denise first.
Oh, sure. Yeah, let's. Yep. You mentioned that Denise is here. Denise, you're on.
Thanks.
And I was, of course, on mute. Chris told me you guys were doing service delivery plan tonight. I just came back from vacation, and I told him that I wanted to be on this because I personally love the service delivery plan. Before I worked for the Red Cross, I worked for FEMA. I've worked in emergency management with fire departments and with county emergency managers, and I've never seen a tool that plans out a disaster as well as our service delivery plan. A lot of people think of it as a budgeting tool. I do not. So know that if I show up on your disaster, I expect the dates to be right on the service delivery plan for when you're going to do the services. I look very closely at them. And I just think it's crucially important. It is a place you can do kind of what Chris does and what a lot of other people do and write everything out on a board. But if you transfer everything to that service delivery plan, then you have that document. You also have the historical record. I often pull old service delivery plans to see what we did. That is my best historical record. Everything in RC View goes away. The service delivery plan is that record. And one of my favorite things ever that I got to do on a sync call with Brad, we'd been talking, I'd turn in the service delivery plan, I'd gotten the service delivery plan approved, and he said, when are you guys gonna start doing DCA? And I was like, well, it's in the plan. Read the plan, the dates are right. But it's really crucially important, and it really helps you understand all the different levels of a disaster. It can seem a little overwhelming at times, but if you methodically go through this, and if you go through this with your team, I like to bring everybody together. We can do it on Teams now. We've done it in the past on Skype and on WebEx, but I actually like to bring not only the leadership on the disaster, but invite other people who are interested in service delivery planning to sit in a room or sit with us in some sort of environment as we go through this. It gives everybody a better understanding of the service delivery plan. And I just think it's crucially important. So thank you for taking the time and doing this confidence builder. And you're all now future planners. I'm very excited. Carl, Dave, tell them how to do it right.
With your assistance, of course.
Oh, no. That's it for me. I'll let you guys have your class, but thanks for letting me just pop in real quick and tell you how important this is. Have a good one.
All right. Thank you. All right. Now, David. Are you still on mute?
Of course. I have a dog barking in the basement. Yesterday, we did go over the service delivery plan. We did take a look at what elements we put into it so that we come up with something that is our best guess as to what we will be doing over a period of time. It does include the budget, but are we actually delivering services to that budget? Are we meeting that? And then what drives our costs? Tonight, are there questions from yesterday? Any lingering questions that anybody wants to bring up at this point? Okay, tonight we are going to go through, we're going to demonstrate the completion of a service delivery plan. We're going to look at the approval process, and then we're going to be discussing when to update that plan. Start out to develop the service delivery plan. I'm going to be biased. The middle one, the single person, is not the way to go. It is not cool spending, getting done with your first couple days of directing a disaster, of making sure that everything's in place, and at 11 o'clock at night, you're trying to create a plan that you want to meet somebody's approval by noon the next day. Do not do that. But if you do choose, get a hold of somebody, have them work with you, at least a DDD or somebody at that level. The other two, and the ones I found that actually seem to work better, is a group effort. Depending on the size of your disaster, if it's a level 2, a very small level 3, it doesn't hurt to get all your leads together. Take a look at first your initial plan, have a discussion about what's needed, send them out to come back to a later meeting with actually what they would add to that plan and come to consensus. The third is to actually have planning run this operation or the planning process for you. It does, if you are in the early days of a disaster, and if you are leading that disaster, or you are a lead in that disaster, there's a lot you're going to be doing. Having somebody go around, gathering the information, talking to each one of the leads, and then bringing that back for a group meeting, and then developing your plan makes it go a lot smoother. That's the one I actually prefer, but the group effort on a smaller one works almost as well. What happens, and I've learned this the hard way, is that the single person, when you do it yourself, you know what's in that plan. One or two other people are watching what their functions are doing and how they are meeting that plan in what they're doing on a daily basis. A whole bunch of people don't really have much ownership or feel ownership in what they're doing. When you have them involved in developing the plan, they own that plan, they know what's to be, where they should be, they know when they're getting off a target, and they're much more likely to bring it up to you, and you can solve a problem much earlier in the process. Anything to add on that, Carl?
No, that's great. And certainly we encourage people to do it as a team because everybody needs to have ownership of their elements of the plan. So at minimum, as you notice in all of these, it's at least reviewed with the full leadership to make sure everybody is on board with the decisions that are embedded in the plan.
It's awful easy not to include them. Go ahead.
I wasn't speaking.
No, I thought you had the next slide.
Oh, sure, I can do that. I can do that. Okay, so yesterday we talked about the purpose of the plan and what the basic ingredients are. And the important part for most of you, and I come from mostly a mass care background, it's almost like cheating. The mass care team is well underway by day 5 and 6 in terms of the response. If you look at a typical chart of the sheltering plan and feeding plan, the vast majority of shelters, all but 1 or 2, are generally open in the first 5 or 6 days. So when you're putting together the list of the shelters, the mass care team has a pretty good idea what that is. So it's not unexpected that you should have an idea of what your peak number of shelters, the peak number of people to be sheltered is, feeding plan. DES probably hasn't started yet. If it's a large disaster, financial assistance is yet to start. But we talked about the pros and cons of different types of DES and financial assistance plans yesterday. Staffing plan is well underway. If the people aren't on the ground yet, they're mostly requested and on their way. So you should have a pretty good idea of the staffing plan already. And logistics is well underway. So by the time you're doing the plan, most of your things are pretty clear. The questions that are remaining open are the later services. Now, the one that is a surprise to many people is for a wildfire, you generally get going early, floods, other things that are early. Our earthquake tends to have the peak population around day 7 to 14, so it's out a ways. Fire can break containment, other things like that. Hurricanes, you know whether it's landed or not. So most of the disasters we create a plan for, you will have a lot of information when you start. One of the questions that was raised to us when we were putting this presentation together, some people said, well, just tell us what's in a perfect plan. And so the answer to that is you can't. I went through a series of plans that were done, and all 4 of these plans are fully approved. And you'll notice that the mass care is 43%, 37%, 10%. The casework is 9%, 1%, 44%. They're all over the scale in terms of what the numbers are. There is no magic plan. Each disaster has its unique characteristics. And these are all general disasters. If you're responding to a mass casualty incident or other things like that, the plans will be skewed even more. So there is no standard plan. It's developed for the unique situation of the incident that you are responding to. It's not that it's magic and it's difficult, it's just different. Now, there are some things that show up which you don't like to see. You know, right here, the budget was for 29% to be on worker travel, but the actual was close to 50%. Likewise on this one, the worker travel wound up being a much higher level than anticipated when the plan was put together. Now, that could be because they saved other places, and so the percentages changed, but those don't mirror the plan very well. I'll show you some more later on in the presentation when we get to those. Anybody have questions about this? This has been something nagging by a few people that have written to us. I'm shocked. No questions on a perfect plan. Okay. One of the things I did leave in here just to belabor the point is these charges for showers. In this DR here, 8% of the cost of the entire operation was spent on shower trailers. So shower trailers and toilet trailers can be a substantial cost. So finding the right shelters that have provisions makes a big difference. Okay. Oh, thank you. I thought my pointer was showing up and apparently it's not. The shower trailers in the middle, the third one about the middle of the page, portable shower is the line there. Okay. Lesson learned that the pointers aren't. Okay, so if there are no further questions on the setup, it's time to go to the plan itself. So I'm going to switch to showing you the plan. And hopefully you've all done your homework. So this will look very familiar. But this is the service delivery plan in all its glory up here. And you should have seen the same template when you downloaded it. We created a DR 999 in the wild north in honor of David up in Alaska. It was filled out yesterday for an event that started on Sunday. It's a level 3.5. Now, when I counted it up, the service delivery plan has 27 new changes this year. So even if you're accustomed to the service delivery plan, you'll find a number of new items, and this is one of them right here. You get to pick IPT or, no surprise, the service delivery plan or the initial planning tool. What that does is let me change it so it's STP and you can see it. what was happening is when people were copying out data, they would go to this and they'd copy this budgetary information. And now it's grayed out if you're not in the initial planning tool. You're intended to fill out the service delivery plan. So that was added as a way to make sure people were looking at the right document. So that one's right here. So what do we do? So as we talked yesterday, the service plan gives you historical ranges based on incidents. So how many homes were destroyed, majors and destroyeds, minors and affecteds, the total DA. So we then plugged in some data based on the hypothetical wildfire that's burning in the wild north. And we came up with this information, and we put in 5 fatalities. Hopefully that didn't actually occur, but just so we can use more of the sites. I didn't fill out notes for all of these, but I did add that we got the estimates from the fire service, which would be a common way we'd get that information. It then gives us recommendations as far as overnight stays for the various sizes of event. So again, this is based on historical information, and you can see these metrics. This is an Excel spreadsheet. I see one of the questions that came in, and that's exactly what you should see. The service delivery plan is an Excel spreadsheet, a very fancy Excel spreadsheet, but yes, an Excel spreadsheet. So these are the historical ranges, and then you fill it in. So we figured there'd be a total of 5,000 overnight stays. So we're actually way over the top. So that would be more a level 5. So maybe that estimate was too high when we were doing the initial planning tool. It said we'd probably need 2 support trailers. We said, we don't really know, so let's put 2 down because that was the recommendation. We're going to transition to hotel rooms to non-congregate as quickly as we can. So we're going to have some people in non-congregate toward the end of the operation. We've got the meals commensurate with the number of overnight stays. Usually that's 2 to 1 or 3 to 1, depending on how many meals you're serving in the shelter. And we've got some community feeding as well in here. We put in some DES, number of items, number of households supported, and we figured that out. And then herbs deployed. Now, one of the questions is, where might you get these estimates from? And I covered that in the previous one and from some of the conversations. So let me just show you that real quickly. One of the tools that you have available to you, and let me share this, is the service delivery, is the mass care planning tool. And that's what we talked about a couple weeks ago. And here is the advanced operational plan that's generated by the mass care planning tool. And so it shows the number of workers, the number of meals based on the sheltering assumptions that we built into the plan. And then it has a feeding plan here. I set it up in this case that we're going to have 2 districts. And so you can see how they're allocated. And then it shows you the staffing levels you'll need. In the same way, you've got an AOP for the DES, and that's here showing the number of trucks you'll need and the number of service associates and staffing. So this is provided in the tool called the Mass Care Planning tool, and that's one that's usually executed earlier on in the operation than the service delivery plan. So you will have this to work from to develop the planning tool. Okay, now I'll go back.
Carl, who normally develops a mass care planning tool?
Well, that's an excellent question to ask because it's moving. In the current guidance, the mass care planning tool is taught in the mass care planning class, mass care management class, and it's intended to be done by the operations section or the mass care leads. In the new guidance that is not yet released, coming out later this month, the operation of the tool will move over to the planning team. And so that's going to be the new guidance, working with the mass care team to develop it. Much like the service delivery plan is led now by the planning section with input from all of the other sections. The mass care planning tool would be in the same way. Excellent question. Okay, so did anybody have any problems filling out their initial planning tool? Any questions raised? You all did it perfectly with no questions. I love it.
Belinda has her hand raised.
Go ahead.
Sorry, guys. I'm having a conversation with Eddie, and he wants me to mention this. So, so the SST section, it says, let's say there's 2 of them. It's suggesting a level 4 or whatever needs 2 SSTs.
Shelter support trailers. Yep.
Support trailers. I'm sorry. So there are these questions about, like, if you open them, then you pay for them. But if you don't open them, then it is not part of the larger estimate. There is also something we talked about in logistics recently, and I'm mentioning this to you, Carl, because it sounds like it should be something that people should know. There's been some changes in the way trailers in general are being accounted for.
Excellent points, Belinda, but we're going to cover that. This is the planning tool here, and that's in the detail in the service delivery plan, and you're exactly right. There have been some changes on how that is tracked, and trailers that are shipped but not open have their own line now.
Oh, great. Thank you.
If you want to cover that, it's coming up on line 500, I think, or 533, something like that. So yes, we'll cover that in a little bit, but thank you. Other comments that we haven't answered yet? Anybody else with a hand up? I don't see any. Question came up in terms of how to accommodate these for COVID environment. That is a real one that needs to be addressed. So for example, if you stick to the 50-person shelter and you're sheltering 500 people, instead of having 1 or 2 larger shelters, you're going to wind up having 10 or 12 shelters. So it is going to affect the numbers when you do the plan. And it costs more to deliver because you probably need more box trucks to deliver to more shelter sites. The mass care planning tool can take that into account when you enter the numbers there, because you do enter the specific size of the average shelter into the tool. So yes, that's taken into account. The other area that's going to come up here as we do the plan is the number of workers deployed changes radically. Instead of the typical $1,000 to put somebody on a plane and send them to a DR, right now 70% plus of the Red Cross people are being deployed virtually. Now, some of them will request the $50 mass care card to cover their communications, cell phone, internet bills, etc. But that's far less than deploying somebody physically. So those are some of the things that change. And there is this thing that's already added here, this line 78, which is the non-congregate shelters. So we're spending more on non-congregate shelters, hotels, but we're spending far less on travel cost for staff. Any other questions on the IAP, or IPT, sorry? Yes,
I would just add in there, Carl, all the, the blue and this purple color, whatever color that is, bluish,
Purple.
yeah, gray. Thanks. That's, those are guides, right? So Betsy's question about how do we accommodate for COVID, like everything that Carl said, but also remember that these are just guides. If we're significantly out of whack with what this guide is telling us, then it's probably something we either need to relook at, or we say, well, it's COVID. It's a different, it's a different environment now. So
right. So the guidance is there to help you, which are all these purple columns, but they aren't requirements. The big thing I always explain to people is that the purple's there as guidance. If you deviate radically from the guidance, somebody up the chain will ask you why. But if you've got a good explanation, it's not a concern. So here's an example right here. Hopefully you can see this, where I didn't follow the guidance. It said recommendation would be 3 meals per day and the shelter would be 15,000. I said, no, we're only serving 2 meals a day and we're providing snacks for the breakfast. Okay, that's a decision that you made as the sheltering or the operations lead, and it's fine. You have your choices. You don't have to follow us. Another one right here is in the DES. The recommendation was 10 items per household. I put down 4. Denise would probably question me on that one. That's pretty far out of whack in terms of 10 to 4. But depending on where you are and what's being distributed, maybe it's a reasonable suggestion. Somebody else have a hand up?
Barbara?
Yes. When we talk about the cost for staffing and that $50, technology, I know it's 53 or 6.
Yeah, it's 53, yes.
thank you. The 53. As a deployment lead, I've been told by RMS that I'm to offer either equipment or the technology reimbursement to folks. So how are we accounting for the shipping of the DST equipment to virtual workers?
That's built in the plan later down, so you don't need to worry about that right now. And what we're addressing here is just the initial planning tool. And what we tried to emphasize is that this is something you should be able to do pretty quickly in the first 48 to 96 hours of the operation, first 2 to 4 days. This is it really, this one, well, 2 pages. One, you need to know an estimate of number of homes, destroyed, majors, minors, and affected. Power outages are important because that tends to drive the number of community feeding. Fatalities and homes without power are there as well. And then this section here. And it's not a lot of information to get a reasonable ballpark for what the operation is going to cost. Then the next level down is where you're going, Barbara, with your question in terms of the cost of deployments, both virtual and physical deployments. Other questions? Wildfire kits are different. Yes, that's true.
Betsy jumped on here.
Carl, I couldn't type fast enough on power outages. My question has to do with, is this include both? It's twofold. A, PSPS, power safety, power shutdowns. Does it include the number of households included by that? And the other question is, how do you account for evacuations? And I'm talking about, if this is multi-layered, where we do have a disaster and we have households with no power and we have evacuations. How do you account for that in the IPT?
Okay, so where that's accounted for is the number of overnight stays. So of those people that are evacuated, how many of them are going to stay in a shelter? As the guidance is for the power safety, power shutdowns, the Red Cross isn't providing specific services to those individuals. There are some corner cases where we get requested by cities or counties to help, but in general, that's not considered an emergency situation for Red Cross intervention.
I understand. So up above when it says households without power, it does not include PSPS
right, I would
shutdowns.
not include the PSPs in this list up here. This
okay,
is
thanks.
generally set up for a hurricane or something like that, where the power is out because of the fire, not in advance of it.
Yeah, PSPS generally, PSPS does not have to result in a DR number, right?
Correct.
So remember,
Absolutely.
It's got to be, and so we might not
Absolutely.
even be doing it. Okay.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Thank you.
Chris, the part that gets tricky is when the fire starts and there's a PSPS.
Absolutely.
Do you not count them or don't you? And that's where it gets fuzzy. But in general, no. Okay. Other things on the IPT. Okay. And then you do the graphs. Here, the last item was when does the service begin? When does it peak? And when does it end? And that generates these nice sort of graphs as far as when the services are going to be. And as you probably all saw when you filled these out, they start out as 0 and they indicate they're red because the data hasn't been completed. So they've certainly tried to improve the tool so that they can lead you to fill in the blanks that need to get filled in so you can do it quickly. Okay, so being that there are no additional questions, I'm going to assume everybody had a great time with the tool. One of the suggestions that was put in the chat was the sense of, do you do just one IPT? Certainly the IPT gives you a range of what the answers might be based on your confidence, which is right here. Let me not gray that out so you can see it better. It gives you a low, a initial budget, and a high. You may want to do multiple scenarios, and this is something that's covered in the new planning doctrine, is that there could be different courses of action, which is the terminology that's being used, where you may want to say, well, I'm not sure whether the fire containment's going to happen right away. I'm not sure if it's going to spread to this neighboring community. You may want to run the IPT a couple of times to just get a feel for how it would change if the fire grew larger. Okay.
Yeah, and I'd say
Go
through
ahead.
this, you're constantly asking yourself, what's the impact that I'm having on this community for this amount of money, that amount of money? You know, this is really getting more expensive. Is there another way that I can do this that doesn't reduce the service to the community, right? That's the key. Sometimes we get into, you know, I don't know. Sometimes we'll, you know, keep it under a 3, keep it at a 2, right? That type of thing. We try to keep an event at a lower cost. We always want to keep it at the lowest cost possible, but not at the expense of client service ever, right?
Right.
So
I actually was going to bring that up and say call Chris at this point, which I do, basically for just that. When you're on a borderline decision, is this a 2 or a 3, a 3 or a 4? We do need conversations off the IPT.
One of the questions that came up, the historical data is hidden, so you don't have access to it that calculates these data. You can certainly look at past DRs and see them directly, and you can look at ones for your areas. There are ways to also access other ones from across the country if you have some questions about past ones. But the spreadsheet was considered complicated enough that they didn't want to show all of the hidden tabs as well. There's a bunch of those that are in the background. And based on that comment from both David and Chris, here you can see the initial budget came in at just under 400,000, which puts us into the low level 4 event. Okay. So the next part here is a narrative, and this is what Denise spoke about. Filling in a narrative is a key part of the developing your plan, because that's the written summary of what is your intent. The numbers are nice and they generate the budget and other things that come out of the tool, but the narrative really is the discussion of why you're doing something. So it's important to fill in the narrative of what your strategy is, what's your intent. And I think of this in a couple of ways. One, it's also a way of saying when something goes out of bounds. If in your strategy narrative, you write that we're building this strategy because there's no way that fire is going to cross that river and affect the town down the hill. There's no way we're going to have to plan for that. And that's built into your narrative here. When the fire does cross the river, then you have a change in your plan. So your narrative is a set of your assumptions, a set of the way you anticipate providing the services to the community. So that's the first section here. These lines 152, 153 is where this starts here. Then the impact section, again, what do you know so far about this impact of the operation? There's a service version history here. Many SDPs go through multiple versions. Some for a level 3 and 4 may only have one version of the service delivery plan, but for larger events, it's common to have multiple. Next section here is the key assumptions. And here's where we were filling out. And again, if we looked at the planning tools and the rest of it, and here's what I was saying about mass care. So the event started on the 7th. We're going to fill this on day 6. So for the service, for the mass care team, all of these cells here are history. So you've already got that. So you pull this data from the 5266 or other records as far as the number of people that were sheltered on those given days. You're filling it in, and the future then is how long are those shelters going to stay open? So what's going to happen in week 2, what's going to happen in week 3 and 4 and onward. And you'll have a pretty good idea of that from your locality and the type of fire, how long it's going to be. Is it going to be something that's routine and people are going to be heading back home in a couple of days? Or is it going to be something more like the lava that flowed in Hilo, where we were in day 120, I think. So we had to actually extend the service delivery plan so it could cover out additional weeks. Okay, so the total stays. I guess, Dave, if you can do you want to talk or enter data? We should split this off.
Which would you go
Doesn't
ahead
matter.
and talk, and I'll put some data in.
Excellent. Otherwise, we're not going to have something to show when we get to later lines.
Okay, let me go. Do you have something you want to add?
That's what I sent you the other information.
Okay. Which one is that? Honestly, I don't have it.
No problem. I'm just going to fill in some stuff pretty fast here so you can see it. We have a very controlled shelter. It ramped up very quickly and it's now coming down. And so then we're changing to larger populations here because we we had said that it would be peaking later on in the operation. Okay. It's acting more like a earthquake than a wildfire, but so be it. Okay, but you can see that you just continue to enter the data. And Dave, if you can carry on for the weeks there.
Okay, just a sec.
And it gives you your total number of stays compared to the historical average. We said we were going to be above historical average. And you can see that right here in the initial planning tool, we said we'd have 5,000. The historical average was only 2,300. So hopefully we don't come in too much more than 5,000 total, because I think we were going to end, we were going to see the sheltering decline in week 4 and close in week 5. So you can just zero those out from there. And so that would be filling in the sheltering. So you look at your sheltering plan, especially in the sheltering area, you can look at your historicals. You're going to have the first 5 days of sheltering already in the books. So you can extrapolate from there and talk to your sheltering team, find out what's happening with evacuations. So it's pretty straightforward. This is another new line in the plan here, 209. There is now a specific line to put in the cost of shelter trailers. And it's the total cost of shelter trailers. It's been added to it. So we'll just pick something. They are expensive. So we're going to put in 25,000 here for the cost of the shelter trailers in this operation. That was mentioned earlier now, and this is what Belinda and Eddie brought up. These are also new lines, 215 and 216, on the number of SSTs that are on the operation. So you can figure those out, both the SSTs and then the functional support trailers. Recommendation is 2, so we're going to take it. Gosh, we need one of these for the disability, even though it didn't recommend one, so we fill it in. Then it's already given you the quantities of the items that are in the trailers. You can add additional quantities if you think they're going to be needed. So one thing that happens, for example, is comfort kits. If you're going to be in a situation where the shelter is going to be open for multiple weeks, sometimes the clients are going to need more than one comfort kit, in which case you may need more. So here's a recommended minimum that's here, and here's the quantity we already have in the trailers. So we're well covered for the recommended minimums. So we're probably good. If you want to add an additional one here, so we add, these shelters are going to be open a little longer than expected, we can add additional comfort kits, and then it shows up in the total cost. So it's very easy for anything that has a standard price. One of the other hidden tabs is a standard price list for all of these items, so you don't need to look up the cost of the item. It's already built into the tool. The other new item here is beginning on line 250. There are new drop downs. So if you want additional items, you can find those that are in our price book that aren't listed above. So for example, if you wanted non-standard kits or mosquito net or heavy blankets, if it's cold weather event, you can pull these out. And again, they fill in to the thing. You enter the quantity that you want. Let's say 500. And because the price is in the price list, it automatically fills in the column over here. And I guess I don't know if my cursor is showing there, but it automatically fills in the cost for the item. One of the things we had noticed in previous plans is a lot of the non-standard items were showing up without a price. And so we need to fill in the prices for the standard. If it's a non-standard item for a deployment that's also not in the Red Cross price list, the other blanks are still here. So you can add completely unique items to your operation.
Carl, did we ever get a response on whether the DRO is paying for the PPE, or is that coming directly from National?
It is coming, it can come from National. What I haven't confirmed is whether there's a cost for it from National. And Denise or Chris, you may know that.
Which item specifically? Sorry, I was responding to chat.
Yeah, thank you for taking care of the chat for us. Chris, the question is, National is got a stock of PPE, the gowns, masks, soap, and goggles.
Yeah.
When they're shipped to the DR, are they billed out to the DR like any other item shipped from a supply center?
I don't have an exact answer on that. Yes, I think we should apportion some cost to the DR. That's my personal opinion, but I don't know for sure how they're going to do that. What we might end up doing is just doing an other PPE for a dollar amount based on how much we think we're going to use, something like that. But I mean, anything that is used, a resource that's taken up by a relief operation should be billed to that relief operation or charged against it, if you will.
That would make sense to me. Go ahead.
This is Eddie. They do charge it if they deploy it on a DR that's on that accounting string. They'll get an invoice immediately and it gets charged.
Okay. To my knowledge, it's not going to move the needle for the entire operation, but it is something that should be tracked, right?
Shouldn't be a lot, no. And there's a question in chat that I don't know the answer to. It's David Fromer. He says, I thought there were no longer $0 items. It looks like the items he's talking about are the signage kits and the they're branded items is what it looks like to me. Do we know why those have a $0?
Oh, these ones here.
Yeah.
Clamshells banquet. That is an excellent question. I'm not familiar with those being zero as well, because I certainly know how to price them out. Yeah, they don't move the dollar. So, okay, that's a great question, Dave. Well, let's find out why they're still zero.
He's noted COTS and medical COTS are zeros as well. And some of it, COTS should definitely have a cost. Some of it is go ahead.
That one I can answer because the COTS are assumed to be returned.
Right.
And the medical COTS are assumed to be returned. So there's no cost for them here, but there's another category below, which is for damage to items that are returned. Right. So the COTS and medical COTS should be zero because the assumption is they're going to be returned after you're done using them. When you get a shelter support trailer, the assumption is that all the durable goods in that trailer will be returned. If you get a shelter support trailer, the nominal cost is in the $14,000, $15,000 range for the expendables. But if you didn't return a single thing on that trailer, it'd be more in the $50,000, $60,000 range. Yeah. The assumption is most of those items will be returned. Same is true for the AFN.
Right. And there was talk earlier about the shelter support trailers, and Glenda said about if we crack them. Yes, that's important. That tells us whether or not the cost will come off the DR at the end. But on the front end, we're still going to charge the DR because we're accessing that resource, right? We're utilizing that asset. So the point is, if you don't have to crack it open, don't crack it open. But yeah.
Right. But the question that came up here, one second. The question that came up here is the trash bags and the clamshells and the banquet pat, because those aren't returnable items normally, so those should have a cost. And I'll check and find out why those are zero. Okay, excellent question.
We've got hands up from Belinda and Betsy.
Go.
So the comment I was trying to add had to do with staging additional trailers. Because the cost of, let's say, for instance, we were pushed 10 trailers, but we
Yeah.
only planned to use 2. Previously, we only accounted for the 2 that were open, but some recent questioning in logistics makes it, because of some changes in finance, they want us to account for all 10 trailers on the DR. And that seems
Correct.
a new, okay, so that's a new thing that you.
It's a new thing and it's coming up. It's way down here in the logistics section in terms of number of trailers that are deployed but not used. Here, it's line 733. So you're a little bit ahead of me, but you've got a great point.
Sorry, Carl.
Okay.
We'll let you keep going then.
Going.
Not a problem. We'll get there. Okay, where were we? Sheltering. So we finished sheltering. We finished so the one item I'll check on this is the consumable items shouldn't have a 0 value. So that is correct. But the durable items having a 0 value is also correct. Okay, then again, you have a narrative section. And this is again between your team, not the what, but the why. Why are you doing the things you're doing to support the operation? And so I think this is a real important section, as Denise indicated, because it's the motivation behind the numbers that's in here. So this section is looked at as far as what you're going to do in the operation, not just you're opening 3 shelters or you're supplying so many items. Okay. Next section down then. Oh, so we're in the response narrative for the shelter. And now we're into meals. Oh, and Dave, thank you. You've been busy. So he filled in the meals following the recommendations. And so now we have the meal section in. We're looking at this. Now, this one would raise some red flags in review. We've got 13,000 meals that we're planning. We're double the historical average, and we're even higher than our initial planning tool. So we're going to want to understand why those numbers went up. If there were additional people sheltered, we had to evacuate the neighboring city. The fire did jump the river. We're then going to say that's why the numbers are what they are for the area. It's not that it's right or wrong. It's just understand why they're different than history. Okay, then there's feeding outside of the shelter. And this will magically appear soon, I trust. A lot of operations have community feeding. Many of our operations have very little community feeding. So for wildfire response, although it's very common for hurricane and other types of response for flooding that we have a lot of community feeding. So we have the shelter feeding and then the community feeding that's here.
Looks
I'm going
Steve,
quickly.
It's fine. Steve's got his hand up while Dave's filling that out.
Okay, Steve, what's up?
Yeah, and just a question, in the IPT, we figured 2 meals a day, and then in the service delivery plan here, we figured 3. Would that affect anything?
Oh, yeah,
All right.
and that could be the easy explanation of why the meals were higher. We
Okay.
originally thought we were giving a cold breakfast or just snacks. We decided that standard Red Cross policy is to actually do 3 meals, so the meal count went up. And it may be as simple as that. So excellent question.
Bernice, do you have a follow-up?
Where does that explanation go?
That is your narrative.
So we go back up to the narrative and change it?
Yeah,
Or add
you
to
fill
it?
it. You would add, well, you hadn't done this narrative when you did the IPT. The initial planning tool was done quickly to just get a ballpark of what the operations costs were going to be, let the fundraisers know how much money has to be raised, give a heads up to the national team as far as what your strategy is in terms of shelters that you're going to be opening. Now, when you do the service delivery plan, you're giving the details of this is how we're going to address this community's needs. And so in here, when you talk about the features, you would put the narrative actually for the is up here for the whole operation. You'd put that in here in terms of if it's a change or your strategy, you're going to do 3 meals a day, for example, in the shelters, and 1 or 2 in the community. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, then in the meals section, we've got the standard meals that were just entered here. Same idea as the shelters. You're going to be entering it around day 6. So you've got a pretty good idea of what your meal counts have been. Most kitchen operations are probably up at full speed by day 4. So you're going to have a pretty good idea of what shelter capacity or what feeding capacity you planned on. You're going to have implemented most of your feeding strategy by this time, both the meals in the shelters and also the meals in the community. Now, in terms of meals, you then have the question of what percentage of those meals are going to be filled in by catering. And somebody asked earlier about changes during COVID. We do an awful lot more of the meals by catering vendor now, single service meals, although both World Central Kitchen and Southern Baptist can now provide single service meals to us. Be aware you've got to order a larger kitchen because they can only do about the quarter of the volume of meals when they do single serving out of a single Southern Baptist kitchen. But our partners have adopted to the environment that we're working in. And now it's got a nice hint here at the bottom. When you add up all your meals in percentage, you should come up with 100%. If you have extra or less, just we put an extra 20% here, you'd come to 120 and it'll give you a red. So whenever you see that, you can just go back and you can correct it so it gets to the right number of meals by percentage. And then it figures out the costs. And each type of meal can have a different cost. Okay, so that's the meals. The next section is you've got the kitchen support trailers. So its recommendation was 2, and we conveniently chose 2 of them. So if we're using a Southern Baptist, this would apply. If you're using World Central Kitchen, we don't generally order the kitchen support trailers. So we need to adjust these numbers. If we're doing catering, you don't need a lot of Cambros, at least food Cambros, for example, because everything's single service. So this is part that would adjust based on COVID or not COVID environment. Chris, I'm trusting that you're keeping up with the chat right now.
Yeah, I'm trying to. It's a good point. There's a good distinction. There was a question again about the shelter support trailers, and if we're pulling for products out of our local supplies and not an SST, how do we account for that? And so I said, then you list 0 shelter support trailers because those are products for 700 people that come from the DFSC. And then you'd list the individual items that you're going to use on this relief operation, 100 cots, 200 blankets, 100 cleanup comfort kits, whatever. And so you just don't charge yourself for a full SST.
Right. And so you can easily do that right here. So the part that Chris was indicating here is that trailer quantities are here. But so we use some of our local regional support trailers. So we're going to use 1,000 comfort kits out of there. We use blankets out of there. So these numbers are for replacements of your community trailers as opposed to the national trailers. So excellent question. Okay. So one of the things to think about is we use the same tool for a level 2 through a 7H. And the large level 7 operation, which may have a budget in excess of 20 or 30 million, so it uses the same tool. So there's lots of questions in this template, which are things you may not need in your operation if you're dealing with a level 3 operation or something that is a couple of shelters and some local feeding. But what I find really valuable about the tool is it raises a lot of questions you may not have thought about. So when you look at this list of supplies here, you can say, oh, privacy screens, yeah, those would be really handy. I need to have some of those. And if you're not getting them in a support trailer, you probably need them, or you may need to make them. But think about the things in the list and what you might need for your operation. So I find it as a nice checklist of what haven't I thought about when I'm going down the list. Okay. So then after the next section after meals is snacks. Snacks are done pretty straightforward. We generally use a $1 charge per snack, and you come up with a number of snacks. The mass care chiefs usually have a set of rules of thumb, so 3 snacks for every meal or something like that, or per person in shelter, so that you can come up with a reasonable rule of thumb. There also are the historical guidelines here that you can use and come up with a suggestion. And being that our meal count went up, we've entered even more than we had in the IPT here. Okay. Now, this is a new line as well, 403. So somebody had asked earlier about damaged cots. I skipped by that one here, but this is for damaged Cambros. You don't need to fill this in. It's built in as a rule. You'll notice it's not a white square. It goes into the budget. That is set up by National as far as a formula of what they see historically on average. If there's a reason you can defend that it can be changed or it should be changed, you can certainly put that in there. But in general, it's one of those that's just an average based across many operations. So it gets built into the budget as a plug. We do have some operations where we use more cots than normal or damage more cots in some parts of the country, in which case you may need to up the expected damage for cots, as I mentioned earlier. Okay, next section then is the emergency supplies. Force package suggestion here. You know, you can get a standard push pack, which has supplies for 250 household or 280 households. Here is one trailer, or actually a 560 is a full-size trailer. And you can get a certain number of those depending on what you're going to supply. The first question I always ask is a push pack what your clients need? So think about what's in the standard push pack. If you're dealing with a wildfire, you probably don't want the standard push pack. We don't use a lot of tarps, for example, which they would use in a hurricane area. So you probably want something different, and you may order 0 of the push packs for wildfire. There are special wildfire packs, and I think that's in here now.
Oh, there is.
You've got wildfire trailers on row 424.
Oh, 424, okay. Okay, right here. So instead of getting the standard ones here, we can say we want 0 of those because we're dealing with a wildfire. We want 3 of these. And then it populates up the numbers based on what's in a wildfire support trailer for DES. So they're trying to make the tool easier to use and support the operation. And again, you can look at what's in a standard trailer. You can then add or delete additional items based on what your particular clients need. I know sifters, for example, are controversial. Some counties won't allow them because of the hazardous waste. Some people say they don't want them and then actually do. Some people want them right away. So look at the list of standard supplies and determine if that's what your operation feels the clients need.
And then an individual wildfire kit may be in that drop down, Carl. I don't know if that's.
I didn't see it there when I looked.
Okay, then maybe it's just the trailers now, but
yeah. There is the fire kit individual use contains a tote. So that would probably be this one right here.
Yep, that's it.
Right, but I was surprised that it has a 0 value. So
put a number, put 100.
Oh, I have no quantity. Sorry. It doesn't have a quantity if you multiply by 0. There you go. So yeah, they're about $40 a piece. So yeah, we do have the individual ones with the tote here. We do have the standard trailer with wildfire support. So whichever way you want to do this, and again, use it as a guide, but think about what your community needs so that they can recover after the disaster. Go ahead.
And the same conversation, you know, what if I get the somebody to make the sifters for me, then they're free. What if I get it off the Home Depot prox count? Fine. All of that is good stuff. We'll back it all off the total cost at the end. But right now, again, we're trying to get a sense of what we're committing the organization to.
Yep.
And that's why Denise says I would never argue with my boss. But, you know, she does say it's because it's not a budget tool. It develops a budget, but it's a planning tool. And I hope that point that she was trying to make earlier made sense to everybody.
And this is an area in particular where, in my situation, to fly things in, to bring them up, it's cheaper for me to actually go and try to buy local. But I do need to put that in and get an idea of what those costs are, what quantities I'll need.
Okay. Other questions? We're going through this pretty quickly. I hope we aren't dissuading anybody, but you can see how it develops. They're all straightforward questions, and what I like about the tool is it just keeps giving you more straightforward questions. When I work with this in a planning role, I typically work with each individual section, and it only takes 20 minutes or so with an individual section to fill out their part. So you're working with the mass care lead, or you're working with the staffing lead to work on their particular section, which is not that much of the total one, and then it comes together as the full plan. Okay, next section down here is the DES of when we're going to supply it, and my magic fingers will type in the background. Right, David?
I'm trying to get down there. There we
Okay.
go. Magic fingers will type.
Thank you.
And magic fingers just blew it. Okay.
That's okay. Okay, so now the question here when you're into the financial assistant is what percentage of the people are going to ask for assistance? This is the DA numbers repeated from above. Okay, right here in the DA from above. And then what percentage of those people are going to seek assistance? The only wrong answer here is you can't have more than 120% or 100%. You can't be supplying things to people who don't have damage. So if you see that 100 majors is not going to work, what you want to do is go back up to the DA and change the DA and raise it to what you think is now the new actual. But typically not everybody requests assistance. And for example, a lot of the majors, a lot of the destroyeds and majors in wildfire have insurance, in which case it may be lower than 80%, maybe it's 50%, in this case. But this builds your case count. So if you've ever looked at the 5266 and on the back it says number of cases, this, you can't do that. This will build the number of cases you're expecting. So now we're expecting 410 cases, or 415 after we add the 5 fatalities. So that would be the expected number of cases to be opened, which would go into the 5266, and then it will compute the percentage of cases that have been opened against the expected number of cases. So that's one of the metrics that's used often in the talk that'll come up tomorrow, is how close to being done are you, is what percentage of the expected cases have you opened and closed. So that's here on the financial assistance section. The
So
next, go ahead.
If I can cut in, sorry, I'm cutting in much more tonight than I was yesterday.
No, you're good.
But there's a little bit of chat about how do we assess the number of cases and whatnot. Sue's recommending around 75%. That could be true. Belinda's saying it sounds like we need to plan for a little more. She's added a little extra fat. So what are some of the things that drive what that number is, right? What's the community that you're responding to? If you're in a very affluent community, I think of it as how many people or what percentage of folks are going to present themselves to us for financial assistance. So, it might be as low as 30. It could be, I think our average is around 65. Based on your DAT calls, what it is in your affected areas. If you don't, you can talk with your chapter and see what that looks like. But there's a lot of factors you can get in there. Whether we build in a little extra fat, yeah, I kind of try to. I would never tell anybody other than this recorded call with 45 people on it. But I mean, I tried to a little bit. But if you build in a little bit on feeding and a little bit on sheltering and a little bit on casework and a little bit on staff, now you've doubled your budget, right?
Right.
So you got to be very selective about where that little bit comes in, because again, while it's not really a budgeting tool, it's just we're forecasting. We don't want to over pad it so much that we're asking donors for more than we need, right?
Right.
Sue's
point,
got her
Chris.
hand up.
Yeah, I'll get to Sue's question in just a second. Let me add to that. What I use for these numbers here is I typically go to census.gov and look up the insurance rates in the area. So if most of the homes are owner occupied and fully insured, then our case counts typically are lower. If there's a lot of renters or other situations, then our case counts tend to be higher. So there are ways of getting at that data to make better estimates than random guesses. Sue, go ahead.
Thanks, Carl. So I see a couple things. To answer Betsy's comment, when I do the numbers, I take 75% of major and destroyed. And then the other thing I do, and I've worked with Chris on a pretty accurate number. He was closer than I was, but I really believe in the 75% amount, except in a wildfire, because in wildfires, there are people who actually live in what appears to be an outbuilding that doesn't look like a residence to us. And so I add major destroyed and then outbuildings, and I take 75% of that, and I'm usually pretty close. There are a lot of buildings that are they're vacant. They may be vacation homes, or they may be unoccupied, like rentals.
Yep.
So that's where that number, it's never 100%.
It's never 100%, and you're in the right range. And I think you've got the right latitude. And for the people on this call, the easy answer here is that not any one of us knows the right answers for, or the best estimates for everything on the service delivery plan, but we talk to the people who have more experience. And financial assistance recovery is not my area, I fully admit, and I will find somebody who knows much better than I do. So,
and let me go into that again, actually, because we were asking why minor and affected. I talked about they might be able to get some cleanup kits, referrals, soft assistance, mental health. You also, what I didn't put in chat is that and Lou said it, service only cases, you also have to talk to those folks. There's a level of staffing that goes out to actually meet with people, and maybe we are just telling them they're not eligible, but they still want to talk to somebody. They want to hear from somebody at the Red Cross. That justifies why you have staff on the ground.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, and then this is the other big driver, which is the number of cases we've talked about, but the average size of a case. And that has a big multiplier, as you can see here. 145 cases times 450, you've got $200,000 worth of individual assistance. Now, with individual assistance versus DCA, you have much lower staff costs for getting the aid out to people. We generally don't start that till a level 4 operation. I think, is that the correct guidance? You have the current stuff, David.
It'll be for a level 4.
Right. And then the staffing is much lower. But again, that's the next section down here. We'll be figuring that out. This is the shelter transition cost. That is a new section here in the template as well. Now that we've got the shelter transition, you've got the traditional DCA here. And notice that you either do DCA or immediate assistance. So there's another drop down here. So if you change, and now the one gets blacked out and you've got the immediate assistance. So it's very straightforward to flip from one type of support to the other in the plan, and it tries to help you by graying out the areas that you aren't using.
Sometimes we get into this conversation about how big is this, and are we raising money, and should we be budgeting for financial assistance? And so here's what I'd like everybody to consider. We're always going to budget that we're going to provide financial assistance, regardless from our level, from our pay grade. We're always going to assume we're doing financial assistance and casework the way that we normally would. If the organization has to make another decision and decide that we can't for some extremely large operation, they will let us know that and they will correct that. So if there's any questions on our end, just plan for it.
Right. Okay, then some cases are going to get supplemental assistance, usually a small percentage of them. Some cases are going to get health assistance, number of cases here, not percentage. So we're going to do 20 that needed additional support. The mental health also can provide financial assistance. Oops. Disability integration, fatalities. And fatalities are here, which the 1,000 that would be there. And we said there were 5 fatalities, so we're going to put 5 in there earlier. Disability integration, if you need walkers or other supplies that you might need. So let's in there. So those are the other areas in terms of financial assistance. And as you can see, it's very granular. So you can look at any of the individual case as far as what it might be. Would I fill this out myself? No, I would talk to our disaster health services. In this case, I'd talk to disability group. I'd talk to the mental health team to find out what they have been experiencing. Again, you're already on day 5 of the operation when you're working on this plan. So you've got a pretty good feel for the people that are in the shelter and what the needs are. You're not on day 1. So you should have pretty good information to make a educated estimate of what's there. Okay. Next section here, the casework methodology, shelter casework, or whether you're going to use an assistance center, a Red Cross site, or outreach. And this is in here because it changes the number of staffing that you'll have on the operation. If you're going and doing your casework by going out to the field, it's more costly than if you'll see fewer people per day than if you're meeting them at an assistance center, for example. But that's the default that's filled in right now. And then you fill out.
I do see that misses the virtual casework that is going to be done in especially level 4 and above.
That's true. That would change the way these are done.
And your shelter casework is going to be virtual with 1 caseworker for every 8 clients. So it's that's going to affect it too. That it will change the cost.
Right. I think this is rather interesting. In day 1, it's saying we're going to do -4 cases. So I don't think that will occur. Now notice in here, the cases don't start until week 2, which is pretty typical that we don't start client casework right away. We start them later on, and then we're at a slow rate of cases. David, this is your area. Why don't you talk about the recovery part?
Okay, let me jump down. We will be, first of all, the first cases that you're probably going to get are going to be in that shelter. And they're going to be shelter, helping people transition from that shelter. You may have a couple that are medical or mental health related in the shelters. Once your casework, the determination is made as to what form of casework you're going to be doing, then you will see your larger numbers come in. They'll be coming in a couple different ways of if we do have information on clients and if level 4 or above, they can be going on to mobile devices, entering their own information, and then we'll be contacting them back. If we have cell phone numbers we can supply, we can get that to them. We have several ways of attacking virtually. People on the ground, you're not going to see so many of the outreach or the opening up of a service delivery site, but the bulk of your cases are going to take place normally, if you do it well, over a 2-week period for recovery. And I'll leave it there right now.
Sure, that sounds good.
I mean, it's going to be a mishmash of, I attended something today, and it's going to be until latter part of November that it's going to be consistent across the board as to the tools being used and how we can better reach out to them in a virtual manner.
Okay, and I am filling this out. Now you'll notice that the part there that I'm matching,
yeah.
Right here, if I just enter this 0 again, it says it's red because I don't match. It tells me that I'm off by 9, So I just entered the last 9 to get it there. Now that is an unusual curve that just falls off the map from 100 to 9, but it'd probably be much more reasonable to put in 60 and then 49 and get it there so we can get it to match up. Okay. External relations is a narrative section. There's no specific cost to the external relations, but which locations are you going to staff? For example, in a large event in our area, we're not going to staff the city EOCs, but we'll staff the county EOCs. So how many EOCs are you going to staff, and which ones are you going to select to be staffed? So that would be part of the narrative here. The next section starts into the logistics-oriented items. How many ERVs and box trucks do you need? There are some changes here as well, but how many chapter vehicles you're going to be used? How many biomed vehicles are you going to borrow? So sometimes we can borrow from other groups. When are they going to be used? How long are they going to be used is what you're filling in here. Then the workers come, and you need to identify how many workers here. Plan based on the initial planning tool was you're going to need about 300 workers. The force package, which is something I described in the mass care planning tool talk, indicates that you'd have 307 for this size of operation. So very close to what we had in the initial planning tool. The historical average is 800. So there's a bit of a mismatch here between the historical average and the other 2 estimates. So is there a reason that our operation is going to be done more quickly than in past operations? And past operations in this area, did they last for 6 or 8 weeks instead of the 4 to 5 weeks that we built into this plan? That's certainly one of the key drivers for the historical average. Now that we're switching to immediate assistance, which is primarily remote, there are often far fewer people in the casework area, so that would be one area where it could be fewer staff. And then you lay out how many workers you estimate by week on the operation in terms of the percentage here. So we can fill in the blank here. Now, this takes work of building it up from each of the individual groups usually to come up with your staff estimate. And then you fill in which week they will be arriving on the operation. So this is which week they're going to be deployed. And how many more do I have left? Okay. You then fill in the other estimates. What am I off by? 5? No. Okay. Oops, sorry. Oh. I thought it was asking for ratio, I guess not. Okay. Anyway, you can see how you can just fill it in for each week. This is the one that changed a lot. So for planning assumption in the past, percentage of workers that would be travel and meals. In the past, 70% of people would travel. The current planning assumption, based on the DRs that we're seeing, is only about 30% of the people travel. 70% of the people working on current operations will be remote. Now, one of the things that causes some confusion, we have 2 things. We have travel and materials, and we also have travel and meals, and we also have a T&M, T&M and M&T. And M&T is typically $150 for a local worker, and the T&M, the $450 that we have for people that are deployed. So they both get built in general for the planning purposes. You just class everybody the same as T&M. And the $50 cards are not here, but you can work that in terms of a lower percentage and changing the budget for them in terms of the cost. Here's where you do the travel cost. You do the percentage of people flying. Again, when you see some of the DRs, this is where some of the big changes in budget are. Is if you anticipated you'd be supplying most of the people from your local area, and only 20% of the people would be flying in, but then it turns out 75% of the people do, that'll drive your budget up substantially. And I'll show you that in a second. The next area we talked about yesterday were temporary workers, temporary disaster workers, and other event-based volunteers, and what their costs might be. Passenger vehicles come up, freight, and this is where the new section we mentioned earlier, there's a new section here on if you ship trailers in advance and not open them. The point you're putting in here is the duration, which is in months. So if you want to have 2 months worth of trailers, of 2 trailers, you can build that in, and that is for the rental of the trailer, not for the cost of the items in the trailer. So if you're pre-positioning supplies that you may or may not use for the duration. For the trailers that are pre-positioned outside of a DR, they are not accounted for in this line item here. These are only ones that are requested by the DR and to be waiting in case there's a need. There is a provision for a multi-state operation as well. So for example, if we had a fire that was bridging California-Oregon border or between other states, you might have trailers that are shipped multiple times. Again, this comes up primarily for hurricanes, where any of you that have been deployed, I know it's happened to me, I was deployed to Florida for a hurricane and I wound up working in Alabama because the hurricane shifted. So those supplies get moved more than once, and this is another new section that accounts for those additional shipments of supplies. Usually not something important for us. This section now is additional supplies, additional shelter supplies for staff shelters, for offices, and you can enter these items. The default is 54,000, but you can have additional quantities. Then you have additional items that are not listed. So we've accounted for things like ADA trailers or clothing donations that are listed here, things that aren't common that you may want to account for in the budget. Certainly one we've...
Sorry, Carl, there's a question in chat about MCPCs, and I think it's a great question. I don't know where we account for it. Do we put it under other or...
Well, in theory, the MCPC accounts for costs that you were going to spend in the shelter for feeding or other supplies. So it should have been accounted for by the supplies. They are tracked later in terms of, because they're not a service delivery, they're a payment method.
Okay. Yep. So if we know we're going to issue X number, we can plan for them in other, but you should also kind of know what you're buying, what you're going to use them for, and then account that service in the sheltering section, maybe an additional item, something like that. MCPC is the mass care procurement card. That's what it's a staff card we give to a shelter worker so that they have money to buy what, emergency stuff they need in the media of the shelter.
Right, and a lot of times those go for food items, in which case you might account for some additional costs in the food section, or they go for some shelter supplies, and you can account for that in the shelter supplies area.
Yeah.
But the MCPC shouldn't be thought of as an additional item purchased or an additional budget. It should be covering a payment method for something you were going to supply to the shelter anyway.
And I think another way to look at on a smaller event where $1,000 is a more significant purchase on a $50,000 job, right? It's not that big of a purchase on a $3 million job. So on the jobs where we have a lot of MCPCs out there, in the grand scheme of things, we're going to catch it in some of that fat, right? And so yes, we account for it. Yes, we track it. we're super careful. I mean, it's donated money, right? So we're very careful about it. But in the grand scheme of things, there's a lot of ways to account for those dollars and make sure the clients get what they're needing, right?
Right. And then this section here of other logistics, you'll notice the top line here, line 746, is based on the ratio analysis of how much stuff you're already requested, how many supplies you've requested. It's estimated there'll be $54,000 worth of replacement costs. The brackets here are if you think you're going to have above the standard ratios. Am I going to need more of something than I would standardly use or consume of durable equipment? And that's where it'd be put down here. Are you going to have additional repair and maintenance costs? And certainly we've encountered some of those in the West where we've had norovirus and needed to do exceptional cleaning, for example, of some of our shelter sites. And that's what this section is for. The attempt is to try and get the budget as close and get the plan as close to what you're expecting and you can control for it. Community recovery, Chris mentioned this at the last time, meeting. Are you going to be budgeting for community recovery? 3% is the general recommendation. After action report, you should be doing an after action report, and that should be built in. The last one here is your confidence factor. I had a discussion on this one. These are your choices, 95%, 90%. They like you to be really confident, but if you've got a wildfire that is burning erratically, you may have to submit this report with a 25% confidence factor. It's not what we'd like to see because you're already on day 5 or 6 of the operation, but if that's what it is, that's what it is. And you need to put that in as far as the confidence factor. Hopefully, other people around you will help develop a better sense of confidence. But again, if it's a wildfire and it's burning erratically, maybe 25% is the best you can do. The bottom line then is it generates a lot of data on what is expected and in as far as the budget. And we've gone up quite a bit. We're now at 1.2 million. So we're well into a mid-level 4 operation from our original budget estimate that was in the 600,000 range. Okay, we've covered a lot. There are more tabs here that you can look at as far as what the staff planning, what the monitoring. The COVID addendum here is about the hotel rooms. Questions? I think we've been answering as we go. Somebody's got a hand up.
Yep.
2 people. One is hide participant. No. One is you, Chris.
Oh, I was trying to click the button. No, Dave, go ahead. And then Diane Gonzalez. Oh, goodness sakes.
Belinda?
It's not me. Belinda.
Yeah, so I had a question. I asked Chris, I said, what do you budget for repairs and flooring? He made it sound like he will budget if he knows he has to replace it. But yep. I kind of get the sense that no.
Go ahead.
So I would think that you would always want. I'm just kind of curious, Carl. What's your opinion? Like, do you automatically put a number there?
I would base it on experience in the area, because hopefully with a small number of shelters, you're not actually damaging a gym floor every time. That should be the exception.
Okay, just curious.
Yeah, the one that when we know about it, we already, I think in U2, we knew we were going to have to repave an outdoor gym. You couldn't have the amount of traction on that floor, and we were going to just have to do it. So, but I was in at least the second iteration of the service delivery plan a month into the job at that point. So I know that there's a cost there, and I don't want to hide it. I got to put it out there. Or you put it, I think there's a section way down at the bottom that says, what other factors or other things do we need to know about? And I'll put, I got this $30,000 bogey out there because I might need to repave this floor, or parking lot or whatever.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. Thanks.
Nancy, you had a question I don't quite understand. Where do ECODs, expected replacement costs for local trailers? The expected replacement cost for comfort kits in the trailers were recorded up above. I don't know if you're talking about the cost of the actual trailer repairs.
No, she's talking about the stuff in them, replacement cost.
Oh yeah,
for
and
items
that was
the
covered
trailers.
in the items, the shelter items.
Yep.
You just add the quantity that you anticipate to be used. Usually it's pretty straightforward. Okay, wrapping up then. Significant, when do you update the plan? Somebody can fill that in. Okay, thank you. When do you update the plan? One is if there's a significant event that changes. Aftershocks creating more damage, new fire, or the fire breaks containment, the operation takes longer than expected, then you'll be updating the plan. If the planning assumptions change, oops, we missed a whole series when we did the due diligence. I know I've been on DRs where there were places that were flooded and you couldn't get to them. And then instead of estimating something for the unreachable area, they put in 0. So you then had to say, well, 0 was the wrong answer. We need to change it. So those are some of the reasons that it's changed. And the last answer is the plan no longer reflects the operation. So you might need to adjust it for what the current conditions are. I pulled out a couple of plans just for people to look at here. These are actual budgets. And they're tracking if you can see here, the blue line is the budget that's created by the service delivery plan. The red line is the commitments represented by what's on the 5266. And the green line is the exposure, which is both what's recorded on the 5266 plus other items that haven't caught up to the 5266 yet. Shower trailers are a good example of that, where they're ordered out and they haven't necessarily been recorded right away. And as you can see, these two, they track reasonably well, but there are a couple of things that strike when you look at them in detail. And here's a good example where the service delivery plan, the the mass care cost in this case, the financial assistance cost in this case, there's a gap between the two lines. They get to the same point, but they get there later. And that is actually quite common, where the services get delayed. Financial assistance was anticipated to start in week 2. It started in week 4. It then caught up to where the assistance was anticipated. So those are pretty common and happen on many DRs, that things don't happen quite as quickly as the planning would have hoped. The other one, which is a caution, is the one down here. You'll notice that the commitments in staff are well above anticipated in the budget. And the most likely case for this happens is if you've depleted your local resources in terms of staff and you're needing to fly in more people than anticipated. And that was true in the previous case with the virtual deployments. Hopefully that won't be the case. This is a case where you'll have a discussion with leadership to find out why things are going not in the direction of the plans. It could also happen where the DR lasts much longer than you anticipated. And I gave the example of Hawaii, where I wound up extending to day 120. And it probably wasn't anticipated to be that long when the DR was first, the service delivery plan was first developed. In which case you'd do a new plan. Or some of us have been on DRs where we get capped and we're told to live within our budget and make it work, right? That is the last slide. We've run a couple minutes over. Any remaining questions? Thank you, Chris and David, for answering so many of them in the chat while I've been talking.
Yeah, I mean, it just takeaway. I mean, you guys have seen there's so much to this, and at the same time, it doesn't have to be all that scary. We talked last night about how we get to the planning assumptions. It may have felt very fast. I'm sure it was, you know, but go back and take a look at all of that data that you're gathering as you're saying, hey, I've got a disaster coming. You're already communicating, I got X number of homes, X number of people out, X number of people shelters, in shelters, I need more staff. So you're working up this budget in your brain, even though you might not know what the dollars are that goes against it, you know. So and then my favorite part of this is comparing what Carl, I don't know about my favorite, but you know, you can easily look at your 5266, assuming that your team is reporting your 5266 correctly, and you can see those trend rates, you know, and you should be able to know if you're on day 10 and you planned for X number of meals and you've already served X number of meals and you got another 10 days to go, then you know whether or not you're overspending, underspending, you know, are you convenience feeding, that type of thing. And that's when we learn how to adjust, or are we missing people, right, in the other way? And that's how we learn how to adjust. But there's a method to the madness, whether it feels like it or not. And, you know, hopefully we've shown some transparency, and y'all are welcome to join or ask questions or all that good stuff. So.
Right, and I think what Chris covered there is really important, that in total, the service delivery plan seems like a very daunting item. But if you look at any particular line item in the plan, it's usually a pretty simple conversation. So it's really just a matter of looking at the individual sections and filling them in as you go.
Yeah, and then it's really, really important to incorporate your team and leadership in with this so that they are monitoring their own sections, hopefully bringing to you anything that starts going out of line. But that sense of ownership over what's being spent, and when they start feeling uncomfortable, they need to be able to come to you.
Yep. All right, any final questions before we lay the service delivery plan to rest? A plug tomorrow. So over the course of this week, we started out the week on the Confidence Builder on the first 72 hours. Today we've covered sort of the middle part, which is the service delivery planning. And tomorrow we go into closing a DR. So I saw the plug go by, Kirsten, about tomorrow's presentation. We'll hang on for any additional questions, but we'll close the formal meeting at this point.
They don't want to go. They want to learn more. Thanks, guys. I'm signing off.
All right. Bye, Chris.
Thanks, Carl. Nicely done.
Hey, you're welcome.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, thank you.